My English family would mention how affectionate I was, and I wouldn't consider myself, like, compared to my Spanish friends, I do like respect distances more. I'm definitely not touchy. So I feel like depending where I am, I may seem more in one way than another. It's kind of like you don't feel fully English because obviously, even though I know the language and I'm familiar with the culture, I learned English through my parents and at school. So I didn't quite know the slang, so I wouldn't really fit in fully with people my age, especially as kids or teenagers. It's as if I spoke a bit, I don't know, too politely, because I learned my English through my parents and at school.
Right.
I wouldn't be swearing or anything like that.
Hi, Miriam.
Hi.
Pleased to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
You were born and raised here in Madrid, Spain, and your parents are both from the UK.
That's right.
And neither do you feel very Spanish among Spaniards, nor do you feel British among the Brits. So how does that happen? I think that is referred to as third culture, right?
Yeah, that's right. Because the idea is I was born and raised here in Madrid, but by two English parents. So I'd always speak English at home. I went to an English school because it's where they worked. But then I'd go back for Christmas, for Easter, for the summer holidays to see my family in England. But it's a bit hard to explain, but it's kind of like you don't feel fully English because obviously, even though I know the language and I'm familiar with the culture, I learned English through my parents and at school. So I didn't quite know the slang, so I wouldn't really fit in fully with people my age, especially as kids or teenagers. It's as if I spoke a bit, I don't know, too politely, because I learned my English through my parents and at school.
Right.
I wouldn't be swearing or anything like that. And then amongst Spaniards, it's just like small things, like, small cultural differences, like maybe humor. I do feel that I might be more inclined towards English humor, maybe. And then just generally like the experience of having been exposed to more than one culture. I feel like sometimes that also makes you feel like you don't fully belong, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And, well, it's funny and interesting to notice that you could pick up a perfect British accent while living here in Madrid, and you've never lived in the UK as such.
No, I haven't. Yeah.
So I guess the British culture prevailed at home.
Yeah, it was easier for my parents because both of them are English. Like now I'm in a marriage where my partner's Spanish and we're bringing up our kids. I'm trying to speak English to them.
Right.
He obviously speaks Spanish and they're exposed to more Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And there it's much harder because I speak English to them, so they fully understand English, but they see me speak Spanish to their dad. And that makes them mostly reply in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still navigating how to deal with that bilingualism there. Like now I'm trying, and it seems to be working a bit better, to sometimes speak English to my partner because he does understand it, even though he's not English. And that way they see me speaking more English at home too. But yeah, in my case, obviously it was easier because at home I just spoke English. At school, it was an international school, so right up to year 9. We did follow the British system and then it switched to Spanish. So I feel it was easier to stick to just speaking English because my parents didn't speak fluently Spanish.
There is a controversial theory of the language of the soul.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Where do you feel more comfortable in your mind? Spanish or English?
Well, I'd disagree with that in the sense that I feel bilingual, if that makes sense. I always thought I must probably not speak each language really well because I could, like with my sisters, I speak Spanglish.
This theory is against perfect bilingualism. They believe it doesn't exist as a concept. There is one that predominates.
I'd slip constantly between English and Spanish, and I thought that was a sign that I wasn't completely fluent in either of them. However, I did read once an article that said, like, when that happens, it means that you are bilingual. Like, you're seeing both languages as one.
Right.
So the route that your brain takes doesn't have to make an effort to stop and think of a word. It's more like it automatically accesses either of them. I don't know if that makes sense, but I experienced, I used to always be asked, like, what language do you dream in? What do you, feel more comfortable with? And I think it's more based on the context.
Right.
Like, depending who I talk to, like, obviously my parents, I'd only speak English. It would be very weird to speak to them in Spanish. But even like with my work colleagues, if I sometimes speak to them in a different language than I would normally do, then that would be weird.
Right. And what are some of the major differences between both cultures? The Spanish culture, the British culture. I've been around for nearly 5 years now.
Yeah.
I know Spanish people are probably kind of, I would say, maybe happier, when I look at, the party life here and then their philosophy of life.
Yeah.
Pretty laid back as well. Not always the same thing in the UK, right?
I suppose it's more like cultural difference.
Mhm.
Like how we'd be defining happiness or how it's expressed is completely different in every culture.
Definitely.
So you have made a point there, like how the British culture might be more like, I don't know if the word is to shut down or bottle up more.
Mhm.
I do believe so in that sense. Like you do maybe not show so much like anger, or like there may be certain feelings that might be considered more inappropriate, or, generally speaking in that sense. Spanish people are more open in all senses, like, the more affectionate, maybe more touchy. But also when it comes to expressing emotions, they're more open to that too.
I was impressed by the warmth of Spanish people.
Yeah.
I mean, in most other places around here in Europe, it's common for the locals to be kind of phlegmatic.
Yeah.
I like British people. I love them, right? No stereotype, nothing. Basically talking about cultural differences.
Yeah.
As of today, in terms of your social interaction, on which side do you stand?
I'd be in between, because like what you're mentioning, like my English family would mention how affectionate I was, and I wouldn't consider myself, like, compared to my Spanish friends, I do like respect distances more. I'm definitely not touchy. So I feel like depending where I am, I may seem more in one way than another.
Right. And then you studied psychology.
Yeah.
And you've become a psychologist.
That's right. Yeah.
And what do you deal with specifically? Mental issues?
Yeah, well, the idea is I studied psychology and I thought I'd just work here in Madrid. However, what I was surprised to encounter is there's a huge community of English-speaking expats. So the fact that I could speak English was a great opportunity to work with expats.
Right.
So, I mean, people typically think, like, to go to therapy, you have to be, like, chronically depressed or suffering with extreme anxiety, panic attacks. But in fact, like, anyone can go to therapy, and that's fine. Like, it's just to navigate normal daily issues that we can all learn tools and benefit from.
Mm-hmm.
But specifically expats would benefit even more, because there's not just like the daily struggles, but there's the added stressor of culture clash, not knowing the language, being away from family and friends and relationships or partners, if that's the case. So it can be a very lonely stage. Obviously there's the high when you arrive and, feeling like all the novelty. But once homesickness starts kicking in and you're away from all your support and your friendships here might be, a bit more meaningless or not as close, therapy can be a brilliant place there to help you find your direction.
You've been working here as a psychologist, and then you've built a company.
Yeah, that's right. In March this year, in fact. So it's only just been 4 months. I set up my own clinical practice with my two colleagues, Lydia and Itaso, and we set up our company, Open Psychology, because we'd been working, in their case, for 10 years, in my case, just over 7 years, specifically with expats. And we realized that, there is a huge community that do need the support. And it's sometimes maybe hard to find. Mm-hmm. Like, therapy's out there for sure. Then there are psychologists that also speak English. But that added, having experienced living in different cultures or having lived abroad, that's an important element to the mix too. Like, to fully understand what you're going through, I feel is really important too.
Okay. While processing the transition of social integration in a different country, different culture, what are some of the main challenges faced as you're in the field?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just like in any relationships, there can be hiccups, right? But again, with the culture clash and the language barrier, there are more misunderstandings, expectations and assumptions may take control of certain situations and make, just any small disagreements be more intensified maybe. So, we can navigate situations from obviously like misunderstandings at work, with friendships, but obviously couples therapy, particularly in a bicultural marriage, is really beneficial to go to therapy in that sense, to learn, on the one hand, obviously understanding why each one acts, or, what the underlying reasons or what triggers each one. but also the cultural side, particularly obviously thinking in like parenting, that's when differences can be really heightened. But being able to understand like no culture is better than the other. It's just a different way of doing things. And sometimes just being able to see the other person's point of view, see where it's coming from, can already, relieve a lot and take a lot of pressure off.
Right. Well, you don't have to answer this question if you're bound by professional secrecy.
Yeah.
What is the most commonly faced